All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all that good stuff. We also have hollers hollering all across the state. Thanks to your support, we really do appreciate it. Your small dollar monthly donations keep us going. Before we get started, I want to shout out AJ Martin. If you need some jewelry, AJ Martin in Nashville. If you're buying or selling a home in Middle Tennessee, do it through Elisa Parker. She's very supportive of us. And if you need a lawyer, Abby Rubenfeld is a rock star. Go to her. Today, we are going to be talking to somebody who I follow on Twitter, David Dayen, at DDayen on Twitter, also runs or editor of or runs, I'm not sure, he'll tell us, of The American Prospect at The Prospect on Twitter. They do a lot of deep dives on a lot of really important stuff, have I guess what I'll call a progressive look at things. I don't know if they self-describe that way, but I certainly take it that way. And they tell us a lot about what's going on with things like inflation, which is what their latest series of articles is going to be about. They're calling it the age of recoupment. That's the latest article today. David, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I want to give you a chance before we get into it. Just tell me a little bit about the Prospect, the American Prospect. What is it for people who may not know here in Tennessee?
Absolutely. You can find us at prospect.org. The American Prospect is a magazine about ideas, politics, and power. We've been around since 1989, co-founded by Robert Reich, the Berkeley professor,
Did not know that.
as well as Bob Kuttner and Paul Starr, who are still with the magazine. And we try to explain how power operates in Washington, in the corporate boardroom, and everywhere else.
Did not know about the Robert Reich link. That's cool
Yeah,
to know. He's also doing some great stuff just on his own now, doing a lot of explainers. And,
yeah,
I will say the Prospect is like, it's filled with great information and they don't dumb it down. So, like, if you follow them, you're going to get smarter, but you have to be willing to read some stuff. And David is, pumping that stuff out in a really important way. So today we wanted to talk about what I'm calling greedflation, which you guys have called the age of recoupment. I read the latest article that you put out, I think just today or maybe yesterday,
mhm.
about inflation. So I guess maybe just tell us real quick, like, what do people think of when what is inflation?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody knows they go to the grocery store one week and things are 375, and they go next week and things are 450, and the prices have gone up. And suddenly they're in an environment where the price level has changed, and that's inflation generally. And what we saw since the pandemic, largely due to supply crunches and things of that nature, that we had this inflationary period, and that has eased somewhat. But it hasn't. There's a term in economics: up like a rocket, down like a feather. In other words, when inflation goes up, it really cranks up, right? It goes up quick. And when it comes down, it takes its sweet old time in going back down. And one of the reasons why that is that corporations have devised a lot of new strategies with respect to pricing. They have figured out that the combination of market power, which they have been accumulating over the course of the last 40 years, and technology, the ability to know everything about your customer, the ability to know when they shop, what they buy, where they're located, everything else that they can figure out from you, from your emails and your browser activity and your phone. Uh, they can leverage those technologies and that market power to increase prices. And during the pandemic, when prices were already going up for other reasons, they felt less constrained. They felt more willing to take on these experiments in pricing, these strategies of pricing, and apply them to their customers. And what we see now is that while pricing, corporate profits used to be about 11% of the equation in terms of inflation. And late last year, that number, according to government statistics, was more like 54%. In other words, the increased profit margin that has gone to corporations, non-financial corporations, is elevated. It elevated over the last 2 years, and it stayed there pretty much consistently. And we think that it's a combination of being bigger, being smarter, and being more willing to experiment with what people will be willing to pay, being able to pinpoint that. And so we are doing this entire series about all of these different strategies on pricing. We put the first piece out today. You're going to be able to find all of them at prospect.org/pricing. And over the next 2 weeks, we're going to roll out these pieces, and you'll be able to find them all there.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to ask you about here because,
Mhm.
you know, there's these theories out there as we've gone on about why this happens, right? And where the blame is.
Mhm.
Obviously, one of the big uh, fingers were pointed at the monetary, the money, the
Yeah,
spending, the money that was put into the system to sort of buoy the system during COVID, and how that sort of led to this inflationary period.
right.
And so I want to ask you what part that played in it. But I do also, as part of that, want to point out that the numbers show that this is a global issue. So, a lot of American monetary
Mhm.
policy gets blamed, but if you look at it, this has been a global issue all along the way. And, we've actually done better than most other industrialized nations when it comes to reining this in. So, what part do you think that uh, spending or the investment that we made in ourselves or the money that was pumped into the system played in inflation, and how does that interact with this idea that corporate profits have skyrocketed?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First, the idea that the government should have just spent $0 during the pandemic while everyone was locked down and unable to go to work is so appalling that even Republicans didn't agree with it because Donald Trump signed that $3 trillion CARES Act that was put forward, and Republicans went along with it as well. So the idea that there was some sort of escape where we couldn't have spent that money is kind of ludicrous. The second part of that is that we haven't done any massive fiscal spending since the beginning of 2021. That's when the American Rescue Plan was put into place, and we all got more stimulus checks, and there were increases in unemployment insurance and other types of spending on education, for example. That all has really gone through the system and petered out. At this point, the federal sector fiscal policy is is a negative on economic growth, not a positive anymore. The stimulative capacity of all this spending has already petered out, and yet we are still in a position where inflation is above normal and corporate profits are well above normal. The third thing is what you alluded to, which is this inflationary episode was broadly similar across the entire industrialized world, whether you're talking about the UK or countries in Europe or Japan or Canada or the United States. So you can't really just sort of pinpoint U.S. fiscal spending as the culprit for this set of inflation. And then what we say in this story and in these larger pieces is that this inflationary period, which was consistent across countries throughout the world, provided a bit of a convenient excuse to companies to say, "Hey, let's experiment. Let's raise our prices a little bit. Let's try surge pricing, where we're going to charge more if there's more demand. And we're going to do that immediately because we have electronic tags, or we're like Uber, and we can just, if it's nighttime and a lot of people need cars, we can just raise the price of that. This has been a considered strategy, and price gouging is kind of nothing new in America or anywhere, but the excuse for doing it is new. The pricing power that companies have is relatively new and has been growing, and the
Is that because of
technology.
centralization? Like
Yeah, it's
because
because of monopolization. That's
monopolization.
because
Yeah.
companies have become more concentrated. Industries have become more concentrated over time, over the last 40 years, certainly, as we've sort of taken off our foot off the gas pedal on antitrust enforcement. And because there's more technology now. I know more about you if I'm a company. I just know more about you as a customer. You might, do you use because a lot of people in this country do, you use the McDonald's app to get better deals on your burgers and stuff?
I don't, but I'm aware that it's there. Yes.
Right. So why is McDonald's pushing all kinds of people to the McDonald's app, where the prices are much cheaper than if you just walk up to the counter? The reason is that they want to get on your phone. They want to get on your phone so that they can know the information that is key to your experiences, your shopping habits, your geolocation, your various behaviors throughout the day. I got a slide presentation. We're going to run this piece tomorrow from the company that makes the McDonald's app. And it says that they use a variety of factors, this information that they're pulling from you from when you're using the app or using your browser or using your email. And one of them is that they start to learn when your payday is. So think about
Huh.
this.
Wow.
You're on the app. It's Thursday, and you see, hey, I can get an egg McMuffin for like $3. And then it turns to Friday, and they know you get paid that day on Friday. So, oh, now it's $4, right? Because they're personalizing the pricing. They're attaching it right to you. And maybe in many cases, the reason that companies really want to use this personalized pricing, so they know so much about you that they can target a price directly to you. They don't do it because if you're in line at McDonald's and the guy behind you is paying $3 and they charge you 4, you'd be pissed off. But if it's delivered to your app and you don't know what the other person is paying because it's on your app, or if it's delivered through your web browser because you're on Amazon, you're getting a different price than somebody else is paying. Or if it's through your television, which is a brand new piece of technology where there are personalized ads and offers that are being sent right through your television set, your
Mhm.
smart TV, because they know your identity and a lot of things about you on that. Then you can actually get this personalized pricing thing going, what I call surveillance pricing. And so that's kind of the new frontier of all this. But there are strategies along the way that are being used, whether it's junk fees, whether it, like add-on fees to everything that you buy,
Right.
as you, like, if you're on Ticketmaster and all of a sudden, you start paying and they add a convenience fee, which is only convenient for them to keep charging you, or they add, some other fee that's nameless and weird, or surge pricing, as we talked about, where they'll increase the price based on certain demand or certain times of day, or even if it's hot out, maybe they'll increase the price of ice cream. If it's cold out, they'll increase the price of coffee. There are other strategies too, like algorithmic price fixing. So price fixing is something that we all know is illegal. Like, you can't have three CEOs that all sell all of the widgets in a particular area walk into a room together and say, let's just raise the price of all those, and nobody will have any choice.
Which
So
seems like obviously what they do.
that's obviously that's illegal, and that is actually prosecuted pretty consistently among
Okay.
Democratic or Republican administrations.
I mean, we
So
just
what
saw,
they're
sorry,
doing.
just on that
Yeah, go
note,
ahead.
didn't there was just this thing about this guy, he's an oil guy,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
he's colluding with OPEC to keep the gas prices high by not putting barrels into the system.
by not
Sheffield, I think his
producing.
name was. Right.
Absolutely. His name's
Yeah.
Sheffield from
Yeah.
Pioneer Resources. And the Federal Trade Commission found like texts between him and OPEC basically saying, let's cut production so that gas prices can go up and we
Right.
can all profit. But the way that they're doing it now is that a lot of industries are doing it is through algorithms. So they will have an algorithm that collects all of the pricing in a particular market. Let's talk about, for example, real estate. So there's a company called RealPage, and they go into a city, maybe they go into Nashville or Atlanta or wherever, and they collect all of the data of what everyone in that area is paying for rent from all of the major landlords, right? And then they sell as a service to the landlords. Hey, do you want to see what everyone else is paying so that you know what the optimal price that you could
Huh.
charge is? And this tends to, over time, ratchet up the price of real estate, of rent, of apartments. And it's the same thing as three guys going into a room, right? But if you're doing it with an algorithm,
Right.
it somehow looks different, and they claim that, oh no, this isn't price fixing, this is just an algorithm that helps us set pricing. Well, it's price fixing by another means. It's collusion at arm's length, essentially. And we see this in many facets of the economy, in hotel rooms, in airlines where all the airfares are publicly posted, in agriculture. The Justice Department is suing a company called AgriStats right now that collects all of this proprietary data from all the companies in production of beef or chicken or turkey, and then they send them out to all the participants who buy the AgriStats data. And if you're a company that sells turkey, you can see, oh, my competitor charges $1 more per pound. I could charge $1 more per pound, and I won't lose any market share because my competitor is selling it for more.
It
And
takes
this
away
tends,
the downward pressure, right? Yeah.
yes, it takes away the competition. I
Right.
mean, the reason that it's difficult to raise prices in a normal environment is because your competitor might undercut you, and your customers might then go over to that competitor. If you all know the data, if you all have the information, and you're all raising prices in coordination with one another, suddenly the customer is stuck. There's nothing the customer can do but pay the higher price.
So I understand why this notion that the money that Biden put in the system years ago is still to blame for inflation today. That seems very misguided, very clearly. We did see there was a push to pass this oil and price gouging bill that I should note.
Hmm.
Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty, who claimed to care about high prices, both voted against. So
Right.
obviously they don't care about it that much. But I guess my question would be, is there more the government could be doing to push back on these higher prices? Because, maybe it's not Biden and the government's fault that they are the way they are, from that
Hmm.
perspective, but maybe
Hmm.
an absence of pushback you could point to as a culpability for the government in this scenario.
There is more the government can be doing, and they are. The first thing is that in prior years, uh, anything about prices, anything about inflation was thought to be the exclusive kind of territory of the central bank, of the Federal Reserve. That, okay, they'll raise interest rates or lower interest rates, and that will deal with inflation. And there's nothing else that anyone else can do about it. What we've learned now is that if inflation is about these pricing strategies, if it's about data, if it's not about supply and demand, what the Federal Reserve can do is a little bit more limited. So that means other agencies have to get involved. The Federal Trade Commission, for example, which has they're the co-chair of this special task force that Biden has put together on unfair and illegal pricing. Some things that are deceptive or unfair can be targeted by the FTC and
That's what's
other
going on with
agencies.
the oil and the OPEC and Sheffield. It's
Exactly, they
coming
can
from the
target it.
FTC.
Yes, the FTC, they basically said that this guy Sheffield can no longer work in the industry because of the behavior that he undertook. They've also the FTC has a rule on junk fees that says you have to give upfront pricing to everyone so that they can comparison shop with the knowledge of what they're actually going to pay in advance of making that purchase. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has limited certain fees and said, for example, on credit cards, where the margins of credit cards are going up, it's almost like a double greedflation. We're paying more for regular basic goods, and then when you put it on credit, we're paying more for that interest. So what the CFPB did is they said, well, look, it only costs a credit card company $8 to collect after when a customer is late for a late fee. So they should only be able to charge $8 for a late fee. What they had been charging is as much as $35 or $40. And so they just said, no, you can't do that because we have rules in place that say this has to be strictly tied to the cost of the company. And so we're going to go ahead and limit and cap that credit card late fee. So that's another example of what can be done. Another example that I think is really interesting, and last week we saw this program be expanded, is public options. So the IRS put together a free direct file for people's tax returns, right? And they started a pilot this year in 12 states. It was very well received. And normally, the kind of people who would be using this is for simple tax returns. They would be going to something like TurboTax and being charged a bunch of junk fees and charged hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get their taxes done. The government is saying, no, that there's no real need for that. We can figure it out. It's a simple tax return. You
Right.
can do it here. It'll take less time. It'll take less hassle, and it'll be free. And that's another way that the government can use its power. In this case, by providing a free option where otherwise people would have to pay. So there are a lot of strategies, and we're going to be talking about them throughout the next 2 weeks. Go to prospect.org/pricing. A lot of strategies that the government is doing and also can be doing more of to make sure that the what companies are doing around pricing is fair, transparent, and not deceptive.
So one thing I think is pretty clear hearing all of that is that one way not to combat inflation is to put people in power, such as a Donald Trump, who is against any kind of regulation, and his only loyalty is to these corporations that are going to put him in office, like the oil companies he just asked for $1 billion last week. You know, the idea that you're going to fight inflation by putting Trump in office, to me, that flies in the face of common sense. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, one of Trump's biggest ideas is to add tariffs of 10% across the board on exports. I mean, what is that going to do? A tariff is probably going to be passed on the consumer, and that means it's a 10% tax on everything that we buy, at least if it's coming from overseas. And so, that's tariffs have their place, but at the same time, to increase domestic manufacturing, domestic production of goods. But if you're not paying attention to this side of it, the fact that corporations are using data, using surveillance, using information they have to really finely tune what your willingness to pay is, which is not tied to your ability to pay, by the way. I mean, your ability to pay is it would be something where, okay, if you don't make as much money, maybe we'll charge you less. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is that if you're desperate, if you're in a situation where you don't have another time of the day to get lunch because you're working between jobs, and the business that you have a relationship with figures that out, they're going to charge you more. That kind of stuff is in no way going to be affected by anything. Certainly not a deregulatory kind of impulse that Donald Trump has put forward. So I'll give you one of the examples that I think makes this argument really good about the difference between ability to pay and willingness to pay. There was an experiment done on, and it concerns Uber, where two riders asked for an Uber at the same time of day, going to the same place, and one of them had 84% left on their battery, and the other had 12% left on their battery. And the individual who had less on their battery was charged more by Uber. And the idea that kind of makes sense is that if you have a low battery, which means
You're
that
more
you better
desperate.
get a ride now, you better get a ride right now, or else you're going to be out of luck.
Ugh,
That we're going to charge you a little more for that because we know
that's
you're a little
crazy.
bit desperate. And so these are the kinds of things that are happening out there, and it's incumbent upon an activist government to look into this stuff, see what's actually against the law right now, see what might need to be made against the law, and then put those strategies in place. And I just don't think that a Donald Trump administration is going to do anything like that.
I don't either. Just as a final thing here, really appreciate all the information, everything you do. Again, it's the Prospect, American Prospect. Uh, we hear a lot about, and this is I guess, a broad question. You don't have to tackle the whole thing, obviously, but we're sort of holding these two ideas in our minds at once as progressives, which is,
Mhm.
Biden has done some good stuff for the economy. The economy is in pretty good shape, like on some top level numbers, like unemployment is low, GDP, and
Yeah.
inflation is coming down. But at the same time, inequality is still at all-time highs, and the people at the bottom, everything that happens seems to hurt them the most. How do you think about like where the economy is, as in broad strokes, coming from the perspective that you all come from, where obviously we have problems, but also things could be worse?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to get Americans to focus on where their standing is relative to the rest of the world. That's just never going to be a thing that's going to motivate an American. Like, oh well, our economy is better off than Belgium, and so I'm gonna,
Right.
I'm gonna vote for whoever. I think Biden is obviously people don't like inflation. That's true wherever you go. Nobody likes to pay more for, especially when they think that they're getting ripped off or getting a raw deal. And so, presidents often suffer for that, especially when it happens on their watch. And that's generally, the timeline of what happened. I also think that people have this sense that they are getting screwed in this economy. And it's a lot of it is the kind of stuff that we've been talking about, right? I mean, you just have a sense that the corporation is doing something to benefit themselves and and benefit their shareholders, and it's not based on the customer anymore. And so, sometimes that's there are some terms that are thrown around. One of them I've heard is sort of the crapification of the economy, right? And I think that even though that's been happening for a while, that there's this accumulation that people want government to be on their side as a last resort when they're faced with those kinds of issues, and they want Biden to be more vocal and more activist and aggressive around those types of things. And so I think that's one of the challenges that Biden is facing in the economy. And now I think after a year or more of high interest rates, which affect large purchases like purchase for a home, purchase for a car, the cost of borrowing, which is very much tied to the cost of living, has gone up to a particular level where inflation is around goods and services, but that cost of borrowing is also affects the American consumer in a big way, and they're feeling a real crunch from that too. So there's this, there's a lot of things sort of coming together that I think have made people feel, not so great about this economy. And we're starting to see it in the numbers consumer spending is starting to soften, starting to come down. People's savings that they might have built up because of stimulus checks during the pandemic, that started to deplete. And so there's definitely some struggles in the economy, but I mean, I think ultimately when you're talking about how people are going to figure out, this political choice in this season, which obviously everything ends up coming back to,
Yeah.
they have to think about, what's the next guy going to do? What is the actual choice rather than their particular feeling on what the economy looks like today.
David, thanks so much for jumping on here with us. Again, it's the Prospect, American Prospect. They have a series of articles coming out about what they're calling the age of recoupment. What we call greedflation here, however you want to
You got it.
talk about it. The idea is that it's not necessarily just, hey, remember 4 years ago when Biden put some money in the economy and like that's what's doing it now. There's other things going on here and it's complicated and they do a really good job of wrapping it all up. So I look forward to the series of articles. Thanks for coming on here, David.
Absolutely. It's prospect.org/pricing. You can find every article there. But thanks a
All
lot
right.
for having me.
We'll do
All right,
that.
take
Of
care.
course. Take care. David Dayen, The Prospect, really good publication, magazine. They're on Twitter at The Prospect, at DDayen. I see you guys. Thanks, man. See you guys, your comments. I see Michael saying Bidenomics at his best. Hopefully you learned something here, Michael, and that it's not as simple as you might think. But if you didn't, that's okay too. Yeah, go back, Christine, and check it out. It was definitely a good interview with David. He's a smart guy. And, basically, I think the key points here are inflation is a global issue. It has been the whole time. Look at how it has gone. Jason Zachary, that's too nuanced for him, obviously, but it has gone up and down basically globally together. And actually, we have done better of late than a lot of countries. So it's important to keep in mind inflation is a global issue. And then what he's talking about is that corporate profits really make up a high percentage of these profits and prices that we're seeing. And, what else can be done to keep them lower? And what is not going to happen, as Marcia voting against the gas price gouging prevention act shows us, what's not going to happen is you're not going to elect Donald Trump, who is against regulation and is all about corporate profits, and that is not an anti-inflationary strategy. And so, there are things that need to be done, but a lot of that is regulation. A lot of that is, you know, helping the consumer against a lot of this price gouging. And, it's more complicated than you might think. This is a good cartoon that really sums it up. This was in The Economist by Worker, who's a really good cartoonist, that you see the corporate profits are behind the curtain. And, on some level, this is what corporations do. This is what they're built to do. They're built to raise prices as much as they possibly can. But in the article that they put out today at the Prospect, what they basically say is that corporations have gotten a lot smarter, a lot faster than consumers. And so now they have the technology to really figure out how much you could pay and suck every penny out of you. And so, we got to stick together if we want to combat that. And it isn't as easy as like blame Biden. I mean, you see some of the stuff in the economy is going really well. Job growth is soaring, unemployment is low, GDP is high. On some level, those things are related because, inflation is what we can collectively spend on things. It goes up when we can afford it. The problem is the people at the bottom, it hurts them the most. So, one thinker, Derek Thompson, who I think is somebody that everybody should know about, he said on a podcast the other day, he said, talking about the economy and saying the economy is good or the economy is bad is like saying America is good or America is bad. It's like, it's such a general thing. Like, what specifically are you talking about? So anytime somebody's like, the economy's good or the economy's bad, it's like, it's just not that simple. There are things about the economy that are very good right now. And there are things about the economy that are not so good, like inflation. And we're trying to understand a little bit better what inflation being high, what greedflation, as I'll call it, really is. And, just to bring it back to Tennessee here, this is another article in The Lever, which is another good publication. Why blaming inflation for rising prices, big food, big profits, big lies. It's corporations are showering shareholders with payouts, as we're all talking about, what's really going on here. Here's another graphic from Robert Reich, who I didn't realize was behind the prospect, talking about how corporate profits have skyrocketed. But then in Tennessee, you've got people who complain about inflation, complain about prices, like Jason Zachary, like Marsha Blackburn. Meanwhile, we are one of the only states that has a grocery tax, the sixth highest in the nation, that Democrats, Afton Bain and Charlotte Oliver, tried to get rid of this past session. But Tennessee Republicans refused to do away with the grocery tax, as they claim to care about prices being high on working families. But then what did they do at the very end of session? They passed a multi-billion-dollar corporate tax cut. So we can't afford to cut prices for families, but we can afford a multi-billion-dollar corporate tax cuts at the end of session. So I'm trying to help you understand, they don't give a shit about high prices. Republicans in charge of Tennessee could not care less that you're paying more for eggs. They don't care. If they cared, they'd cut the grocery tax that other states don't have. So, let's blame the right things and the right people here. And that's what I hope following us will help you do. And that's what I think reading the prospect and following the prospect will help you do. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.